will be here. So thank you everybody for traveling this way. We're going to try to rotate the meetings around just a little bit as been requested several times. So first of all, happy EMS week. We'll go ahead and start with introductions. I do see some new faces in the room. I think most of you know me, Trish. So, has everybody met Nick? Let Nick introduce himself.
I've met nearly everybody in this room. I'm Nick Salzman. I work for Trish. She's my boss now.
I'm not his boss. We're partners.
Cool.
And then from the SSM Cardinal Glennon team, we have Josh DeGale, Trauma Program Manager. We have Robin here, who's our new PAX PALS coordinator, who's been helping us, the whole team out, a lot with EMS outreach in general. So Julie joined us. Julie Kippart joined us today. Kippart, okay. Joined us today from our IT department to talk a little bit about the enhancements that are going on with the database and answer any questions that you may have regarding that. So, Sarah, I'll start with you.
I'm Sarah McCarthy. I'm a SCAD.
Marianne Ruthmar.
Jessica Lee, also Marette.
Chris Storno, your car.
Cece Hickey, Arch.
Lisa Broomwald, Joaquin Platte Ambulance District.
Nikki Bain, Rock Township.
Kim Aslin, SCAD.
Zach Grado, Florissant.
Pam Miller, St. Louis Fire.
Marie McCoy, I'm the coordinator of nursing for Special School District.
Chris Brooklyn, Merman.
Who do we have in the back?
Lou had Crestwood, Scott Moore, Costa Rica. I took Harry last week.
It's teamwork.
Brian Crosby, Washington.
Katie Eisenbeis, Christian Hospital EMS. Gina Pellerino, St. Louis Children's.
All right.
All right. So first of all, happy EMS week to everybody. Thank you very much for all that you do. I couldn't sleep in the middle of the night last night because I like to think about these meetings before we get to them, and it dawned on me how awesome. I would love to give an EMS speech someday. How awesome you people are! Like every morning we wake up, and there is somebody sitting at a coffee, drinking a cup of coffee, complaining about something, and don't trust them if they're not complaining. But that person is willing to get up at the drop of some noise and go help other people. And so EMS is awesome. You guys do great, and thank you.
And please get a mug as you walk out. It's got candy inside. So we appreciate you guys.
That's why you turned on my cups. We like to always welcome the new services and hospitals to STARS. So Rural Med EMS, Fayette County Hospital are in the process of joining. Pinckneyville Hospital. AirVac has continued to add some additional bases that access the database. Breeze EMS. Since the last meeting, we have added the SSM St. Charles EDs. They have access to the database. And then we also recently did some training and have started interacting with Special School District and their nursing staff. So we're very excited about that because we think that's an important part of our mission to interact with schools and help take care of these kids when they're not in their home.
I was trying to, this is tap on this, Maureen's here, if you want to raise your hand again. I know we did introductions already, but she's from St. Louis County Special School District. And actually that's something that we included in our grant. So we'll talk about that too, but it's something we've been wanting to do for a long time because we identified that need. So we know we have one death that was very unfortunate and very preventable that happened within, the special school district from a one-on-one child. So after talking with Maureen, let's start including those kids. We're mainstreaming our kids more than ever. We know this, and that's something we want to encourage, but it has to be done safely. And our kids are getting sicker and sicker. So she sent me a list of their kids who have one-on-one nursing because those are the sickest of sick in their district. And we have about, I'd say 30% of them already enrolled, but we're going to be working on adding each one of those into STARS and then making sure, all of her nursing staff understands how to use a STARS number and telling us they have a plan, etc. So just be prepared for that, for you guys. We did some work with Warren County, not Warren County, Wentzville School District about 2 years ago because one of SCAD STARS had a trach with a pretty precarious airway, and that kind of opened our eyes to a lot of the nurses approached us and admitted that they were very uncomfortable, but that the kids keep coming and they don't really have a choice and the communication was broken. So we're hoping to really improve that quite a bit. And we're gonna start doing onboarding with the new nurses. We're really excited about that, doing trach training with them as they go in. So, it's very exciting. Yeah. So we decided that we wanted to do something special for EMS Week, besides just, providing, little treats that you get from every hospital, essentially. But all of the coordinators within STARS do exceptional work. And something that really means a lot to us is that we know you guys, most of you, I think all of you, don't get compensation for that. It's something that you do because you want to help your communities. But we do have a few that go above and beyond. It was really hard to choose, but we said, we want to recognize someone from both Missouri and Illinois for just going above and beyond. And Chris Torno, you are our first ever 2018 STARS Coordinator of the Year. So Chris has been there from the very beginning with Eureka, and he's been extremely compliant with the database from day one, even through struggles with it. I think it was Christmas 2017 that completely locked you out, and you stayed on the phone with us. We finally had IT call him directly to walk through what was going on, but he's still stuck with us. He's done individual trainings for each one of their children. He does PowerPoints, makes sure that everybody's compliant. He does, keeps up and makes sure all of his employees are on, follows up with kids, and we really appreciate all the work you do. He's had teams at both of our, races the last 2 years, and probably this year too. Did an excellent case review for us. All I asked was, can you do a case review for us? And he set up a whole PowerPoint, did an excellent job. So, come on up, Chris. And get a picture. Oh. Congratulations.
All right, Chris, get in between. Okay, scoot over so your face is
Yeah,
like
your
in the
face.
middle.
Face is like-
Oh,
Go this way.
you don't want to project my face?
Yeah, kinda, yes. I'll text it to you.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Thanks for everything you do.
Congratulations.
And your community appreciates it. I know your parents love you. I have talked to them like, oh yeah, Chris came by. Oh no, Chris. So thank you again.
Cool. So we'll get into some of the updates we've been working on. As I'm sure all of you figured out, maybe through the confusion of too many emails this week, we are going to work on including our Illinois partners. I doubt we'll probably ever do 2 meetings in a quarter again, because I learned that lesson this week. But we will try to include, every year we'll include Illinois as one of our rotation sites. I also would love to work with some of our other partners. So whether we we have some meetings are in hospitals, but whether we start to work with dispatch a little bit more, or the special school district, or any of our school districts, just so we can start to kind of branch out and pursue our core mission. This is part of the reason that Illinois is interested in their time, and so it just so happens, because we have always tracked the Illinois stars, that I have all the information and addresses for them, so I can do this neat thing on Google where I plot them all out. I would love to do this for the Missouri side as well, and I can do it for some of the counties that have put all their kids in the database, but as we continue to try and get all the kids into the database, this is something I'd like to do for the Missouri side as well. I think it's a good visual, and it kind of shows you how spread out we are, how big we've gotten, and then I think what a lot of services always get out of it, and part of the power of the database, is the fact that you can run kids that are not your own. And so for some of my districts, especially the ones around St. Louis, to see not only their stars thrown on a map, but the sheer number of stars that could potentially be driving through their district or visiting their districts at any time, I do think there's some value to that. I could not include Springfield, so there's a few not mapped there. We had some big news in March, and I'll let Trish kind of explain about that.
Yeah, so for, Glennon, as most of you know, we're a nonprofit, so a lot of the frustration with the database has been on my side too, because we didn't have the funds to move forward to improve it and make it as robust as we need it to be. But we've been working with the help of our foundation for the last 1.5 years now on, trying to obtain this grant from Missouri Foundation for Health. holy cow, did they want information on the demographics of the children we serve, just constantly asking for, you know, how we were going to sustain ourselves in the future, what the need actually was, and did we foresee ourselves being able to actually grow and make it what we wanted it to be. So we did finally receive our acceptance. So they, you know, funded us with $427,000 for the next 3 years. So that is being completely tunneled into the database itself to try to make it easier to access, to improve the, just, you know, you guys have realized when you get on, we just need it faster. We need to have that faster log on to make it more efficient and EMS friendly. So we also want to be able to pull more info. That's something that I learned, that metrics are a must. They want numbers, they wanted proof. We have all these anecdotal stories of success that we've had over the last 4 years with our program, but they want actual hard numbers. So I've been doing a lot of work just trying to pull from Epic, from patient records, and then knowing kids that we've had go out, trying to get them the hard numbers that they want. But we're hoping that as we continue to improve compliance and use within the electronic system, it'll be much easier to pull. And we're already able to pull more than we ever have in the past. So IT is constantly helping us to improve reports to where we can pull numbers of access, who's accessing what plans, and how many times in certain periods. What else are we pulling? Or areas like Nick pulled here. So we're hopeful that we're going to be able to pull more, show more, and hopefully obtain more funding in the future so we can make the program even better. Their focus for MFH, sorry, I always think about things that I wanted to mention there, is the grants for all over Missouri and Illinois for what we use, but their main focus of concern is the North County region, the 63136 zip code, St. Louis City, and then the Southeast. So they really want to see us expanding more into the Southeast region of Missouri, so we're going to be pushing down there a lot more too. That's where they really see their biggest needs.
Yeah, one of their main focuses is reduction of morbidity and mortality
Yes.
in pediatric patients. So cool. So with the technology in the database, we do have a growing number of STARS records in there. There's currently 452 in the database. 362 are active. And so that discrepancy somewhat comes from the fact that it is still new on our side too, and we're trying to go back and collect these wonderful HIPAA forms on some of our kids. So the same as some of my coordinators who've been doing this for a while, how we had to retroactively go back and get them. And as we'll discuss later, it's very key to have that form in place. So some of that discrepancy between those two numbers is just kids who still need to get the form to be officially live in the database. And then there's also a certain percentage that probably need to graduate, and we'll talk about that shortly. Did go back and look since our last meeting, the number of unique user logins was 122, so thank you to those of you who are getting in and taking looks at your kids. And that's a metric I hope to kind of report on each and every quarter and see if we can continue to hopefully grow that and maybe grow that exponentially. We are still working on the iOS, so we have some timelines. We're waiting for some major infrastructure changes before we can fully implement that. And something that our IT has given us over the start of this year is the ability to run some of those reports on the different things happening in the database. Some of it for, like Trish said, for our tracking and things we have to do for our grant. But then some things we can do, as far as we can always just see who's getting into what records. And we consider that a good thing, right? Like that's part of how we all protect it. It's okay, please get in there for training, for running calls and doing all that stuff. It's just something we have to be able to make sure we know who is getting into the various forms. One new one that was added just last night was STARS by hospital preference, which I believe was requested by children. So I will get you guys a copy of that report. What I instantly learned is that we have to come up with only one way to name the different hospitals. So you would never know how many different ways you can write out St. Louis Children's and Cardinal Bennett Hospital.
There.
Yeah, so we'll work on some standardization on our naming process. we already introduced Miss Julie here, and I didn't know if off the cuff there were any questions, or if you guys wanted to just come up after the meeting. You certainly, if you have any questions or concerns, or you want to talk about the technology piece.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm not super techy, so this maybe sound dumb.
No,
Don't
no,
question.
no.
The iOS is like where you could access it from like an app of some sort,
Right.
correct? Is that something that would be able to be accessed without the use of Wi-Fi or internet? Is
No.
there
So
ever
you-
that possibility?
Yeah, you have to be able to be connected.
Okay, so
In
could you
order to
ever
get that.
access the database without internet?
As of right now, no.
Okay.
So that is more of a risk thing than a technology thing, in that because that would push all these patient reports onto everybody's individual device.
I gotcha.
So part of their risk management is it stays in a database, and then devices just access it.
It was one of the questions that our people up higher, because if we're en route to pick up a patient, we can't
May
use-
not be connected.
We're not able to, we don't.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
It's against the rules to have Wi-Fi or internet on
Oh,
in
right,
flight.
for
So
flights.
we were just wondering if there was ever, like, we have some, like our PCGs are able to be seen, we have an iPad that
Mhm.
we use, but it's not internet connected,
So we just went through a similar thing with
Very
Arabic.
bad. I was just wondering what they kind of came up with.
They initially said no, and then as of, I have to speak out too far. The last I heard, it had been approved, and they were gonna put it on as a link as one of the things that could be accessed, just like their reporting software. It was something that was gonna be accessible on the iPad to the flight crews, so.
Yeah, and
I
like,
don't
we
know.
can use internet on our iPad, but not during flight.
Okay.
So it would be one of those things that, like, I mean, without delaying the activation of the flight and looking it up or whatever beforehand, it would have to be done, it would be done during flight time, but
I
you
mean,
wouldn't be able to access the.
And not to add too much, I know crew resource manager, like there's a certain amount of
Yeah.
what you should do, but there is kind of that delay before you lift usually, like as
Yeah,
far as the engine's warming
exactly.
up. Do we think it's a possibility that
That was
maybe you
it
guys
would
can
be
pull
just
it up
if
and
we
look it
knew
up
that
then?
the patient was a STARS patient before we lifted, that would be
Okay.
the key, like if the dispatch was given that information, then usually we do have 5 to 7 minutes, you know, depending on how fast we get out, and the crew could maybe be looking it up, but, sometimes we don't know till we get up in the air.
Gotcha.
It's something that I'm willing to fight for still. We've had discussions with risk management in the beginning of this project where they shut it down, shut it down hard. And what we're starting to, and I can't make promises, I don't know if you
Sure.
should actually even talk about this, but it's what I'm willing to push for. The issue is yes, we're dealing with PHI, we know this.
Yeah.
My argument moving forward is going to be it's a voluntary program, and this is what we need for patient safety.
Yeah.
We've heard a lot, HIPAA was not ever made or, to withhold emergency medical information.
Yeah.
And I started thinking a lot of the arguments that I've had, I shouldn't call them arguments, discussions I've had with risk management along the way, they've always made comparisons with STARS and accessing the Epic patient reporting. And I'm going to start really pushing that you can't make that comparison, because yes, it is PH, I understand that, but you don't have to be in STARS. Parents they sign a waiver that basically says your information's going everywhere, and they can definitely opt out.
Sure.
So, and we've already had a few cases of, children in foster care that we've said, ooh, you know what, I don't really want an electronic system, let's go around and do this a different way.
Yeah.
So, we are very careful about, what information goes in there. You can't control the information that goes into Epic, as you all know, you can't control if you're in there or not. But, I don't know if they'll listen to me, but I'm going to be
Sure.
persistent.
I just thought I should at least
It's
ask,
important.
'cause
Yeah, no,
we
you're
run
right.
into technology issues a lot.
Yes.
And even just we serve a more rural community, which I'm sure probably lots of guys do. And so even transmitting EKGs without internet
Yes.
is painful too. So I know that there are some struggles around there, but I didn't know if you guys had thought about that, or if Arabic had those same kind of discussions with you guys already.
Yeah, same. So I think the rural argument, and then also part of
Rural too, yeah.
it's sort of forgotten at the end of the day, but I mean, part of what we do is also helping track these kids for disasters too. At times where you may not be able to plan on having the internet, and so I think there is an argument to be made there, and we can keep pushing that.
Yeah. I've been told I'm not pushy and persistent. I'm like, okay, thank you. I like that.
Excuse me, for those of us calling in from home, can we mute the phones as it's difficult to hear?
Sure,
Send it over
I'll
here.
see what I can. No.
Is this any better?
We'll try a minute over here and see if that works any better for you. Sorry about that.
That's a lot better.
Awesome.
That's a lot better. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I just wanted to reiterate a couple things as people are using the database. Just for the viewers who are accessing, and I forever and always reiterate, I recommend that people who are responding to emergencies, even if you're a coordinator, the day you're on the truck, I recommend you have a viewer login. I think it makes it much simpler. You don't have to deal with archived forms, plan forms, all those other things. And then part of what we want to know is when your only viewers get this, but when you access a chart, it wants to know if you're accessing for an emergency, and we do track that. And if you are obviously accessing for an emergency, please press yes. And then we always appreciate feedback on the calls. I mean, this is a dynamic and growing and evolving program, and we can't make it better without hearing what worked and what didn't work from you guys.
So Nick, on that, with IT here, is that something that the accessing for emergency can be like a big pop-up that they can click yes or no and then send them to the page? Because I feel like a lot of my crews, they say, well, what am I supposed to click? It's the red bar that always pops up.
Yeah,
It's always there.
it's kind of at the top,
But
right? But
Is it something that like can just be a quick pop-up that you have to answer
Like
before
our
you
PD,
see
think
it?
they're just skipping past it, and
Yeah.
okay.
yeah, and I can take that back to the technical team.
And it,
And my
It's also
instinct
what-
would say that you could do that. We do have some limitations, so let me work with the developer and find out if we can't do it a little differently than what we're doing today. It's definitely something that I think we could look at too, especially in our redesign efforts, that we might be able to do that there.
Because I know another component that I think we had discussed too is that for the coordinators to know when your crews are running calls to, like a notification to admins and coordinators and all that stuff. So. Cool. For my coordinators, for all those of you who control personnel in and out of your district, please just remember to remove people who've left your service so they don't still have access to their logins. And then adding your new employees. I do have a couple videos up. I'm also willing to work on more or better videos if you want something to be able to give in your new hire training or something like that, as far as how to use the database for emergencies for your viewers. And then for my coordinators that are still writing and or editing plans, just a reminder that we have to have this form in there attached to each of the stars. I just went through a couple weeks ago, I think I found 4 different plans that didn't have them, and so this is part of what gives us the ability to have these kids up there. So if you just have it in paper form somewhere, if you don't mind uploading it, or you can always just send it to me and I'll get it on there for them. Our goal is still to have updates on all forms in 6 months or less. And then I do like to reiterate, especially if you're writing plans for your district and you come across a kid who's got some crazy pathology, by all means you can do that interview and get it started. But if we're going to write any kind of specialty care instructions into that form that deviate from your protocols, it's something we really need to loop. I mean, obviously your medical control is the first gatekeeper on it, but then also we want to try to loop in specialties, and I assume your medical director would like to loop in the specialties to make sure that we're doing best practice and doing the right thing by that kid.
Is there a way to add this as an electronic signature in the database? Like if I'm out at a house filling out their plan with the mom there, is there a way I can pull this up and have them sign while we're there?
That is a brilliant idea for a project I started somewhere along the way and stopped, so I will get back to that.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, we started on, yeah.
It was, the thing comes out, it's really easy on iPhone, on Apple devices, and it was not as easy on Android devices, so, but I will, yes, that is worthwhile, especially because I'm trying to solve kind of that backlog of kids that, some of whom we have very little contact with anymore, so. Awesome, and then I just wanted to thank the medical directors, and then also just, to remind them that they are kind of the gatekeepers on the system, so as far as, making sure plans look appropriate, are either by no means a rubber stamp, so if you have questions about it, you don't have to approve it. Let's follow up, like I said, with a specialist or further on, and see if what we can do to make that form work for your company. Fortunately, all of us are from this area, so we're decent at protocols, but like I said, if there's something we're trying to put into a plan that is just not feasible for a service, we need to hear that back. I would say the genetics letters are some of the best examples of those. Like when we first started trying to do that, it turns out we don't carry 20K runs and have normal saline and all that fun stuff. So, but just along those lines, if there's something that does not work for a service, kick it back to us. So, this is something that is new as of this week. This is sort of in some ways a punt, and in the long run we're going to change the way that deceased forms are kept in the database overall. But for right now, just so they're not sitting in the middle of your districts and people could be clicking in and out of them, I created a separate district in the database for our deceased patients, and if you as coordinators would please just go in and change their district from yours to that deceased one, and then we'd really prefer admins only in there. In all honesty, there's nothing I can do to keep people from going in, albeit we can see who are getting into the forms, but we thought this was better both, just so that patient form is no longer being accessed, and some of these cases are a little bit sensitive depending on what happens, so. Cool. Did any questions about all that real quick? All right, so the next one's pretty straightforward, but the program's been around 4 years, and it's kind of time to start talking about the fact that some of these kids are ready to graduate. So, there's not really a tried and true formula for it, but kind of if the reason the kid was initially put in the STARS program and they don't really meet that criteria anymore, I think it's at least a conversation we can start having with them. Some examples I have, are heart kids who end up getting fully repaired and go on about their merry way. Same thing with our trach patients who had the trach for a while to stabilize their airway, but they eventually got decannulated, got their stoma patched, and they're well on their way. As long as they don't have any other severe medical factors. Our complex patients that have slowly worked their way through their issues and no longer follow as many specialties. Patients that turn 18 and are their own legal guardians, as long as they don't have any other significant pathology, and we kind of do a case-by-case basis there as far as kids who stay in after 18, and we certainly have a number of them, who are just, they're never going to be their own legal guardians, they live there with their family, and we still think it's reasonable to keep some of them in the program because nothing's really changed with them other than the fact that they got a little bit older and crossed a line according to the U.S. government. So, and then one group we talk about, some of our autism community, who were initially some of the big populations we put into the program, and certainly if, I'm not gonna meanly kick them to the curb, but as far as we find that's a group we can handle much better with education now, and we kind of see it as EMS is already much better in that area as far as taking care of behavioral emergencies and helping with those kids. So we think that's something we can solve more through education than having each individual patient within the program. That's not to say if they have other, medical history that, compounds the issue, we still obviously can keep them in. And to a certain extent, this also comes down to individual districts. If you're writing plans, if you just find that you guys have the time and the resources and you feel like this is something you can really pursue, it's just from our perspective, kind of with the more limited resources that we have, we're really focusing on the sickest of the sick. And so, I'll never tell you no, but that's a population you might consider graduating, especially a lot of them are getting older. They're approaching 18, the initial ones who were put in the program, and so it might be time to graduate them. This is sort of a brand new thing, so there's no tried and true process, so to a certain extent you let me know what works for you guys. This is kind of how I've been handling it when I call families. First of all, just to check in with them. Sometimes, especially my kids who are further out, they could still be having emergencies. They're just going to their local community hospital and they never make it back into the Glennon system. And so I don't know what's going on with them. So that's one of the first things I check is like, hey, how are things going? Have you guys been using the program? Do you want to stay in? Are you comfortable if we graduate? And then kind of assure them, your number will always be available. And you can always kick them our way if you're getting a lot of complications. I find that the majority of phone conversations, they're like, oh, I forgot we were in that. We haven't used that in years, and I don't want to be called every 6 months about this. So yeah, please graduate us. So you kind of will run into different situations there. But
like Dr. Laffey said in the past, sometimes it's harder to tell parents that your kid's doing great. You know, it's, what, you need me over here?
Yeah,
To see
can't
me?
see you.
They don't need to see me. You know, see me. I want to touch on the autism thing one more time too, because I got a phone call from Metro West yesterday asking about what our criteria was to have children from the autism community enrolled in STARS. And the first thing I always want to say is we still want to support this community 100%, but we just can't handle the flow into the system right now. We need to really focus on the medically complex. Something else that we want to always occur with STARS is we want, if EMS is responding on a STARS call and they get dispatched on a STARS call, we want that to really alert you to, holy cow, this might be scary. What we do, the kids that we do still take into the program, and I talked to our Knights of Columbus about it too, are those kids that they're really sincerely concerned about their safety because they're eloping constantly. They're nonverbal, or they are prone to extreme violent outbursts, and we're afraid of a very scary altercation, which I know this could be a lot of them. But for example, you know, Dr. Gilmore with St. Louis City said right off the bat, we want to do STARS, but we have to be careful because in the city of St. Louis, we could really saturate the program. So we decided we're not taking behavioral. Well, we have one in there who has eloped multiple times, sometimes in the middle of night. He's not in the greatest part of the city. He's completely nonverbal. And there's been a benefit. I mean, EMS has brought him home at least twice. I think they've been with him 3 times. And Chief Miller and I went to his house to visit him. And parents don't have the best means either to keep him within his home where he's supposed to be. So we do see benefit for those kids. We're going to try our best. But they just gave me another one from Knights of Columbus who, you know, I guess he's had good interactions with the police. They gave him chips and let him pretend to drive the car, so now he seeks them out and leaves. So, and again, it's a social situation where he's in the care of his grandparents who have very little means, and so we're continuing to watch him and considering putting him in as well. But so it's case by case. So it's hard to do set criteria for that. I'll let you go. I jumped in. Go ahead.
And then at the end of the day, this is always a good thing, right? Like the kid has gotten better and improved, and so I think that is a good vibe to set with the parents. So.
Yeah, you guys do cards, don't you? Like graduation cards.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Just in the interest of some metrics, and kind of our other mission is obviously obviously take care of the STARS, but then also to do training and education. So I'll start trying to report out on what we've been up to on that front. I know some of this discrepancy, I'm not going to read a bunch of numbers to you, but 212 individual students were trained, 55 certificates. That's a little bit off because there's still some open courses out there. But that being said, if you take the time to go through a course, please answer my quiz and survey so I can give you the CEUs. They're free. It's a click of a button for me, and I'd really like to help you, get your state license. So we'll try to bring those 2 numbers closer together. Some upcoming training opportunities. So on June 5th, we're going to do a collaborative run review. This is an idea that actually came from our children's counterparts. The idea of, looking at some EMS runs in the area, and really with the focus on looking at destination selection. So we're going to do a medical patient, a trauma patient, and a STARS patient. That'll be on June 5th, and we'll be hosting that one. And then I think we're kicking it back to children's, and they're going to do the next one after that. We're going to do that via webinar. I know there's only so much time in the day for meetings, so we'll try to do some of those things on webinar. It will also be live down at Cardinal Glennon if you want to come attend in person.
And that one, yeah, just, did you see the emails on that, Dr. Laffey?
No.
Okay, so that we have a really good, we have 2 cases that were we have 2 cases that were arrests in the field that were saves, and one of them is a cardiac case that we're hoping our electrophysiologist can pop his head in on. He's really excited that we're doing it, and Michael Chaika, one of our NPs in cardiology, was very impressed with the job EMS did on this case. So it should be we should have really good cases there for you guys. So it should be very interesting, not just your run-of-the-mill during case reviews, so.
And then you should, if any of you are coming to MEMSA, Trish will be presenting twice on August 1st. So
And Nick.
yeah, I'll probably stand up there a little bit, try to provide good relief for her. All right.
Did you want to say anything about the trauma conference, Josh?
Oh, you should come. There's 200 people so far. Got 6 hours of training. We're gonna do drowning, gun violence. What else? Traumatic brain injury. We've also got interesting trauma review. We've got child abuse, and then at the end of it, we're gonna do hopefully the area's largest Stop the Bleed instructor course. So if you're interested, you can stay after for that. It'll take about 45 minutes or so, and then you'll be certified to do Stop the Bleed and take it back to your community and do it at anybody that would like it. So should be good. $50. Be there, be square. Roast beef. I don't know. Should be a good day. Join 400 of your closest friends.
There's some flyers over there.
There are.
Okay, awesome. Cool. So go ahead and move on to our case review for today. So this is for one of our Illinois stars, number 470. And so as you'll see, kind of we'll get into. Oh, I like walking
You guys
over
keep
here.
walking
You walk
away
over there,
from
but
the
you need to be
camera.
there so people can hear you / see your beautiful face. You're Mr. Technology that wants to be screamed.
All right, fair enough. As you'll kind of see as we get into the story, the child had been sick for most of the day. And mom had sort of been debating. She was trying to get the kid cleaned up in the bath, and then of course that's when we had the worst emergency, right when she had all the clothes off and there was puke and vomit and diarrhea everywhere. And so she of course is one of our very self-sufficient moms, so she was like trying to figure, you know what, I can just take this kid myself. And she called her husband to see if he could come home and help, and he's like, there's no way I can get there in time, the kid's blue, like would you please just call 911 and they'll help you get down to Cardinal Glennon. So they activated 911, and there's their times there, and there's where you can kind of see the story, and they even documented at the top of their narrative some about her history. So she is one of our congenital central hypoventilation syndrome kids. And there you can see kind of their times. So times on scene 18 minutes, and then 52 minutes from dispatch to arrival at the hospital. So I'll let Trish talk about her pathology.
Then are you gonna go back to her call after that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we should have probably arranged this more, how we were gonna run this through. So, this is Willa, and, I think we may have reviewed her case before, we were just going over case reviews, but, when she first went home, she got to do training with her base at MedStar, and I'm pretty sure this is actually the crew that ran her, because mom said that she recognized the crew right away, and they recognized her when they got there. But just to run over her case, she's one of our rare cases that actually taught me quite a lot. She has congenital central hypoventilation syndrome. Just a little bit of background on this syndrome, which is very interesting, is just over the past, I want to say, probably 15 years, that they started actually identifying the gene that causes this. And before, it was a diagnosis of exclusion. So these were kids who just stopped breathing and tended to just build up CO2 like crazy. And they would rule out a brain lesion or a heart condition or muscular dystrophy. And after those were ruled out, they diagnosed them with this, but now they've actually identified that gene, which is a dominant gene, so it's passed on very, very easily. It's hard to see that, the gray writing. But this is a kid, like all of our kids should, especially our hypoventilators, have continuous and tidal CO2 no matter what. When it comes down to this kid looking at her oxygen saturations, her SpO2 isn't telling you a whole lot of information at all. She can sat just fine, and her end tidal readings can be considered, for a normal kid, typical kid, I hate to use the word normal, incompatible with life. So it's funny, actually, a lot of you know I'm in nursing school right now, and when we went through acid base and all that, I had to chuckle because they're continuously giving me ranges that they consider incompatible with life. I'm like, well, you need to meet my kids, because especially with the pH stuff. So, if you want to flip, did I have her other stuff on the next page? So Willa's interesting. She's a severe case. So, with these kids, and Dr. Laffey can probably explain a lot of this a lot better than I can, but it's an autonomic system dysfunction. So basically, their neurons, the axial arms on their neurons aren't formed properly. So their autonomic nervous system isn't working properly, and anything that system controls can go awry. And the most dangerous thing is that gauge for CO2. So that does not trigger them to breathe like a typical person. The big danger for her is falling asleep. So car rides, naps, anything that can cause her to be sedate, she can just build up and tidal like crazy and fall asleep. Now, if they knew anything about this syndrome, when they say hypocarbia, they might think it was a typo, but not with her, because something that she's been doing recently, which is what she did this last visit, is she overbreathes. So she became actually extremely alkalotic this visit, and stayed that way for a really long time. In fact, when Nick and I went up to visit her, I was shocked when I looked up and what was her entitlement, it was in the teens.
18.
And I was like, why is she doing that? And her parents said, we don't know. She was really wanting to overbreathe the vent bad, but that her gauge isn't working both ways. Reading about her, just the syndrome a little bit last night, I found it kind of interesting that as she gets older, it's even dangerous for these kids to swim. Because when they're swimming, even when they're wide awake, when you and I are underwater, we realize we need to pop up and take a breath, because our CO2 starts to rise, which gives you that panicky feeling of, I need to breathe, and they don't, which I found very just fascinating, that she can go swimming around and then just go unresponsive because body's not telling her she needs to pop up and take a breath. So basically, I mean, aside from the CO2 issues, which is a constant battle with these kids, a constant, just adjustment game, they can also have other issues, which she does have as well, which is pupillary responses can be different, anxiety levels, and that's what they see a lot when she starts overbreathing the vent. She just gets very agitated. They can sweat inappropriately and become hypothermic. They don't control temperature very well. And something else I learned with her case is she does have the type of, the genetic form of CCH that can also cause significant asystolic pauses. So it's more than just a brief sinus pause. They could actually have a full 10 to 20 seconds of asystole. So a lot of these kids will eventually require a pacemaker. They've seen just very small pauses with her, but she's also one that you have to continuously monitor because heart rate's is not regulated properly either. While she's awake, she seems like a typical kid. And when she's wide awake, she can actually spend quite a bit of time off of her vent now. But again, one of the frustrations for family trying to get her out is if they weren't there, nursing insisted she be on her ventilator if there wasn't someone in her room 24/7. I was like, I get that. There's no way I would walk out of that kid's room and not have her on her vent. It's extremely dangerous. What else did I want to mention about Willa? This trip, she actually was having a lot of issues with GI stuff, and they discovered that her motility is also affected by her neurons, because it can affect the gut as well. What else about Willa? I was kind of proud of Cardinal Glennon. One of the issues with her is that her family's amazing, and they traveled with her, I won't name the hospital, but to a hospital for a second opinion that specialized, a very huge hospital that specializes in kids with central hypoventilation, and they changed her settings around quite a bit, which caused a lot of this alkalosis. And I was impressed with our hospital, our little tiny hospital. Afterwards, just talking to pulmonary, they said, the problem is they're amazing, but they look at this population as a whole, and each kid is a true individual case that needs to be handled as, a true unique case, which I love to hear, because again, that's why STARS exist. There is no typical kid. No matter what syndrome they have, it's always on a spectrum, and they always have very unique needs. Is there anything you wanted to mention about her?
No, I think that's perfect. Yeah, and it's very true that the degree to which autonomic systems are affected and how dramatically they're affected is variable from from different kids. Some of them may have more temperature and stability or other regulatory. Not everyone's going to have GI so you really don't know where it's gonna go.
Yeah, and she didn't have GA problems for a long
Right.
time, and they are not for sure that's why,
Right.
but they're
Could be.
suspecting.
Very well could be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, why not? Anything that your body's supposed to do on its own without you thinking has a potential to not be working properly.
No, that's just her. And you know, I talked to respiratory before she left because her vent settings are constantly being adjusted. So that's how we decided to document her. There's also, there were some notes, they're considering, you know, looking if she's, you know, changing her rate by 2 up or down, depending if she's either retaining or blowing off too much CO2, but mom's really good at adjusting that and should be there. But we're also working on plans in the future. It's going to take a while, but getting the ED more comfortable and, you know, accessing they always can access the plan on the database with you, but kind of giving more guidance through these kids. So that's something we need to work on even more.
So typically, is she just managed on the vent in her like acute settings, just making vent changes?
Mm-hmm. It's typically just rate. So with her, so that's actually the biggest thing they've been dealing with her is controlling her rate. So and when she's awake, she usually does okay by herself, but it's when she gets sick and she starts overbreathing has been the problem recently.
I would like to point out how just complicated her form is. So, like, I mean, I don't know how many of you have gone through my trach lecture. That I'm Trisha's trach lecture first. I just like to parrot it really well. But just the sheer complication of they change the inflation on her cuff throughout the day depending on what she's doing. And I don't know how you could ever teach somebody that short of sending them to 20 years of doctor school to be a pulmonologist, right? So, you know, we try to keep up with all that information, and to a certain extent, I think the value of the form, because there's no way you could ever know that, you know, unless somebody was available for that emergency right there in front of you. Also, though, she does have the passing mirror valve in line during the day, and I just would like to reiterate that those are not necessarily benign devices. So if you're there for a respiratory emergency, you really need to consider getting that out of the line and get that out of the way, because it could be the source of your problems. And so just simplify down and get those extra things out of the way.
Does she use waveform capnography at home?
Not waveform capnography, but she has end-tidal continuously now, finally, because all the kids should have it. Again, your SpO2 doesn't tell you anything with these kids, so she now does finally have continuous end-tidal monitoring.
Did her insurance doctors finally approve
Yeah,
that? Good for them.
yeah, so, and that's, you know, we talk about a lot of the challenges these families face, and I'm happy. I wish it would have been more helpful for them, but just to give you guys a ballpark figure of what our parents face, their bill they got from this second opinion, it was $200,000, and it's not covered. So, it's a constant fight to get these kids what they need just to stay safe.
So to kind of wrap up the case review, so they got to the patient at 20:37, so just their initial assessments. They did find the kid still cool and pale. They said rhonchi in both lung fields, kind of cleared some of the other life threats. The kid was alert. There's your set of vital signs. So just a little bit long till that first set, 2052 there, but nothing really too crazy on there. They're calling GCS of 15.
They don't have end-tidal, there's no end-tidal?
There is no end-tidal reported on this, so, which I was gonna kind of discuss at the end. It could be that as far as mom might have had it available, and so maybe they just didn't document it, if it was coming off the vent or something like that. But I do think it's pretty important to document that, regardless of the source of where you're getting it from. So, pretty standard vital signs. There was nothing crazy that happened there. ALS assessment, they talked about, initially the kid was not on the vent, actually mom did bag for a little while, and then they all made the decision as they were gonna transport that, let's just put her back on her ventilator and do that, and to a certain extent I think that easily explains, 18 minutes on scene is actually pretty good when you're, getting a kid on their ventilator and getting out of the house and getting everything set up. They did talk about they struggled with their pulse ox, which as Trisha's kind of pointed out might not be as important in this kid. but they talked about making multiple attempts to try and obtain SpO2, and then they did put the monitor on. Maybe just a little bit slow for my liking, but they did get it on. So here was their narrative, the full narrative. So some key things out of here. You know, the story of mom finding her, the alarms were going off. Mom thinks she aspirated. Initially was cyanotic. EMSS cyanosis is gone, but the kid is still pale. Respiratory rate is, they said it was normal for her, so they compared it to her baseline. Abdomen distended and firmed. They did discuss mom tried to suction. They put the results of that. And then just kind of detailed the fact here that they could not get accurate SpO2 readings. They said the kid was cold. They kind of attributed it to not getting good pleth because of that. And then talked about the monitor there. So I do think, you know, kind of one of those things, depending on which school of documentation you went to, you know, a lot of people tell you the no further change in patient status is sort of like a nothing line to put in your reports. It's like sort of your job to, you know, report if something changed, and if it didn't, it's kind of implied that nothing did change. But I do like the sentence before that where they kind of indicate that throughout they were like watching the kid pinked up for a little while, but then became pale again. So at least, you know, indicative that they were watching the kid the whole way to the hospital. As far as transport destination, you know, they kind of cleared. They say, we got to control this, no major life threats. So instead of going to the closest 8.4 miles away, they did transport to us at 29.3. And it really, I ran the numbers there for you. I mean, for a difference of 13 minutes to get her to her definitive care, you know, there's nothing that, you know, nothing against, I'm sure BJC Memorial is great, but they're not really going to keep this kid right. Like, they're just going to immediately call a transport team and try to get her out of their hospital as quickly as possible. So.
And mom, just to tap in on that too, mom gave them the option because mom was actually scared. So I talked, you know, usually your parents are going to fight and say, you can't, you've got to go to Glenn, you've got to go to Children's, you know, but mom asked them what they felt. So they were like, do you feel like we need to stop or can we go? You know, and they're like, let's go. So we were happy that they made that safe decision.
And you can see these were her blood gases upon arrival at Glennon's ED. So PCO2 of 16, which is quite a bit lower than our 35 or 45 we try to look for, right? So, and once again, just kind of, you know, as far as, you know, they would have started trying to correct that at BJC Memorial, but as far as like getting her down to her specialists who know her, I mean, that's what really needs to be fixed here right off the bat, right?
And it took a long time to get her.
So I will not read this wall. Oh, sorry.
It's an interesting blood gas, just so you know, if you look at her base deficit, it's minus 7.1, which means her actual pH, if she did have a base deficit, would be even higher than that, which reflects the fact that it's probably screwed up to begin with. Like, her baseline is not normal, right?
It is. Yeah, her baseline is always off.
Right.
Because she throws numbers and
it's just interesting when you put those numbers together. It tells you that that's not the reflection of a normal person's blood gas under, which can make these really much more difficult to interpret them too, because you're not always sure what her baseline is. And now her baseline is complicated by the fact that she had an event and probably got a little acidotic and cool, and that throws it off even more. So there's like 3 or 4 different components that are screwing up her numbers, and it's just an interesting set of numbers.
Do they try to keep her 35 to 45?
yes, her end title should reflect 35 to 45 still. It's just knowing that she can tolerate but she can tolerate going outside of those margins better than most, but they do try to keep her there, and that was the goal before discharge, was to get her back into a normal range. And that's on her plan, that her end title should fall between 35 and 45. Did you have another question?
I was just gonna say, is there any things that you should watch for to correct her too fast?
They just take her rate down. Do you know, like, because you wouldn't want to sedate her.
As far as making her breathe not so fast?
Yeah.
It's probably not horribly dangerous. You know what I mean? That's not that 16 is not, I mean, you can do that to yourself. You probably pass out fairly quickly, but it doesn't, I don't know that we would be that aggressive. The only way you could turn it would be to sedate her. That'd be the only way you could make her not breathe. I don't think there's anything else that you could do to her.
Sure.
But I don't think anyone would be that interested in doing that, probably.
I mean, I know they messed with little things like her eye tines and stuff, trying to make her more comfortable, but
but it's a central problem that's.
Yes, she's not,
So,
she gets agitated
I think that's the biggest
too.
problem is that it also makes her really agitated, and that might be a more of a motivation. If she was gonna get sedated, it'd probably be more just to make her more comfortable, not that the numbers would probably be dangerous to her at all.
So I will not read the wall of text to you, but the end of it, she ended up having GI issues, the diarrhea and the vomiting, and that's what was really impeding her ability to breathe. So they found that after they decompressed her with the NG, she improved, and over a couple of days, they got her to start eating normally again. And it still took them, I mean, she was at the hospital a long time just to get out of that respiratory alkalosis as they tried to fine-tune her vent status. So just like any case review, you know, the good, I didn't really point it out, their response was really quick. I think they were on scene from 7 minutes from tone. They knew the kid ahead of time. They did include the mom in the treatments and made her part of treating the kid. I kind of like that they mentioned, you know, whether the suctioning didn't really work, they still documented it. They kept trying to put the mitigating factors for SpO2 and monitoring through alcohol. And then, you know, some pretty good transport decision making. I mean, this is one of those kids where, I mean, you're always going to sort of have that feeling like, man, I really don't want this kid in the back of my truck. Like, where is the closest place they could not be in the back of my truck? But, you know, they held on and took her down. I thought the crew did a great job. I just, you know, always a little bit of kindly critique. So, you know, any of our trach kids, I mean, one of the first things you want to do is prove patency, prove that the trach was in the right spot, and prove patency. And, you know, we really like to see that in the documentation. And then they didn't really document much as far as how they moved this kid around or how they secured them for the car ride. You know, they kind of document the kid's cold and that why they couldn't get SpO2, but we don't really have a temperature or any attempts to try and warm the kid back up. So, you know, and as always in trip or documentation assessment, you know, that it might have happened, it just wasn't documented. So, and then in the vital signs, there was a long pause there. So first of all, they didn't get the first set on until 15 minutes into dealing with the kid, and then there was a 20-minute break before the next set of vital signs. And these are some of like the sickest, most critical kids we have, right? So, you know, we want to be down closer to that every, you know, 5 to 10 minute vital signs and trending and really watching them close. And then absolutely, you know, as you pointed out, Ms. Stacy, like, I don't know if they were watching it, because they did make a discussion about how mom didn't think the vent set or the stuff reported on the vent was correct, but they never specifically mentioned CO2. This is absolutely
a service that has entitled, not all services have it.
That's true. This one is a service that does have it though. So yeah, absolutely. Any kind of trach or respiratory emergency, please just toss the CO2 detector in line. It'll help tell you a lot about that kid ventilating. And also kind of something we're working on this year is really just encouraging good monitoring of our kids, especially any kid who you're there for respiratory problems, any kid you're giving O2 to, because unfortunately we've seen, you know, sometimes where people kind of get complacent and they're like, I guess the kid's a little sick, and they put a little oxygen on them, and then they go to writing the report because that's what our bosses really wants to do is write the reports, right? And unfortunately they're not keeping eyes on the kid, and some of our kids have not done well. So if you have a kid who's sick enough that you feel like you need to put oxygen on them, it's probably a good idea to monitor CO2, whether that's through a nasal cannula, or in this case, you know, obviously in ET CO2. And then, you know, blood glucose on all of our kids, especially ones who aren't verbal and can't talk to you, and then a temperature. Cool. So that's, any questions about the case review?
Can you go back 2 slides? Do you make these case presentations available, like, for review after the fact?
For you guys, do you need to take back?
Like to share the base, yeah.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Just share the PowerPoint.
She doesn't have a GT or anything, right?
No, I was gonna ask, she doesn't now. They documented that her abdomen was very firm and rigid, and decompressing her at the hospital helped quite a bit. Do you guys all recall what you would do if she had a Mickey? Yeah. Is everybody comfortable with that? Been taught about that, about venting? We can review it later too, but if she had a Mickey button, it could have been helpful with them. They could attach her attachment, and then just basically you put a 60cc syringe on the end of that, and it's decompressing, just like you decompress a lung and let that air out. So she got that helped her tremendously at the hospital when they dropped an NG and were able to take some of that pressure off. She had quite a bit of pressure up on her diaphragm. Yes?
Did she get IV access or fluids the other thing. It's a pretty long trip and it involves.
Not from EMS. It was established.
That would have been probably helpful, because she was dry,
Yeah,
she was,
I mean, a lot, it turns out most of this was being dry.
Yeah.
Or a lot of it was probably being dry.
yes. So it's another,
I mean, you know, she was cool extremities, they weren't getting good pulses, you know, she had some GI losses, she was tachycardic, so there's a couple things that would make you think that fluid bolus might be good.
not bad, yeah. That's a good, really good comment. So, any other questions or at all comments about?
Oh, and then just to reiterate, what Nick was saying, I think, you know, when you have a kid with a trach, it absolutely, the words have to be written down on the chart specifically that you prove that trach was perfectly fine. It just has to be like the very first thing. It can't be implied, it can't be, you know, code words. It has to be very specific. I checked the trach and the trach was patent, you know what I mean? It's really super, super, super important. Because we've had cases in the past where it kind of sounded like maybe they kind of looked, you know what I mean, but really just was, you know, really didn't know for sure. And if it ends up being a problem anywhere along the way, you really want to be able to go back and say, yes, it may have been a problem 20 minutes later, but at that point it wasn't a problem because I was 100% sure. I think that's just, no matter what, this kid wasn't a trach problem, but it should be very, very clear in the chart. You know, trach was patent, easily moved air, lungs, you know, good expansion, blah, blah, just get it over with. Come back to that. And that's exactly what we do when kids come in and we're intubated, right? The very first thing, if you get intubated in the field, the very first thing you do in the ER, 100% guaranteed is make sure that tube is still where it's supposed to be. Very specific about it.
That's something I've started putting in the trach lecture. Like, just consider it the same as one of your coworkers just intubated a kid and said, "Here you go, please take this kid to the
Right,
hospital."
what are you gonna do? First thing you're gonna do.
How do you prove it's good?
Yeah.
And just do the same steps you would for an ET tube.
Is everybody comfortable popping and tidal onto a trach, even in line of the vent? RT said basically to us, we asked, does it need to be in front of the HME or behind it? And they said it doesn't matter, it's gonna read, but for the best accuracy, to put it closest to the trach, just like you would on an ET tube, is the best, so.
Yes, ma'am.
So, we have 45 students currently that have one-on-one nursing throughout St. Louis County, and unfortunately, we do have to call 911 quite a bit. When EMS does arrive, is your preference for the nurse to report and stand back, or do you want them to help out in care too? So like on this scenario, they'll mom suction the trach, right? So do you still want the nurse to be involved, and then do we want the nurse to ride with the patient, or stand back? Because a lot of our kids too are nonverbal and have behavioral disorders,
So I'm gonna say it's gonna be dependent on paramedic comfort level, is gonna be different for every single case. It's like any profession, you're gonna have some that are very comfortable and experienced and some that aren't. I am going to make this blanket statement, if your nurses can go and they know that patient, please, please, please send them. We've had.
I would think
And they know you, the comfort for the child, if they're not unresponsive, it's a comfort for the child
Yeah.
to know somebody in that.
And we document baseline the best we can, but a paragraph isn't going to be enough for how complex our children are. So many of your kids are neuro. So many of your kids probably sees 100 times a day, and they're probably very hard to discern between that or a neurostorm or an autonomic storm or something that needs to be treated and something that doesn't. That's next to impossible for a paramedic to like, okay, we're clustering, we're seizing, per my protocol, I should treat this for this. Do you feel like this is something we should treat, or do you feel like this is every other day when you're a little bit agitated? We've had some cases where, especially over in Illinois, we've seen where home health has said, oh, EMS is here, considered it a higher level of care, and said, I'm done. Insurance doesn't pay for me to be here anymore. Another healthcare provider took over, I'm out. And EMS was actually terrified because this is a vet patient and mom wasn't coming either. And it was a very dangerous situation. I'm glad the kid got to us safely. But yeah, we would please, if they're available, to come, and that's a huge asset. And I wouldn't think you'd ever have problems with that, but if they ever would have any pushback or someone didn't want them to do interventions, please let me know, because we're not their supervisors, but we could definitely provide education as to why they need to let that person assist in patient care. So, did that answer your question? Okay.
Did you have a question, Mr.
Yeah, I
Bruce?
guess this is a question for everyone. Does anyone else have issues with caregivers responding to you for updates? I feel like,
Oh,
is there
yeah,
something that you guys
sure.
have figured out to remedy the situation? Because I've tried letters, phone calls,
I mean,
Google
we have the
documents,
same
emails.
thing too, so we have one in particular who's very difficult to get a hold of, and it was that way from the
Fortunately,
beginning.
it's most of our parents.
Yeah.
I only get 3 or 4 responses a year. I mean, is that something that, I don't wanna kick the kid out, cause that's a disservice to them, but, I mean, if these caregivers aren't keeping up and providing the information, it's kinda useless after a year or two that their information's gonna be out of date. I mean,
Just show up with the license.
Yeah. You didn't call?
We just wanted to pop
If
in.
it's, you know, we have good access to children's now. If it's ours, get a hold of me. If it's children's, get a hold of them, get the medical updates. That's something that, if I worry about, because I see a lot of our kids in our hospital, and most of you who know me know I'm a bleeding heart, but it kills me when they lose resources because their parents are non-compliant, because I figure it puts them in that higher risk category, and they get kicked out of clinics because the parents are, you know, no call, no shows, and not answering and not being compliant. So they say, we don't have time for you, we're a busy clinic, you know, we're not following you anymore. And then I'm like, please don't, because these kids, I feel like, are at higher risk. So we are happy to help you update anything. If it truly is a sick kid that needs stars, get a hold of Gina or or Nick, and we'll update that information for you, because we can access the charts and pull everything we can.
Have you tried just showing up at your house?
No, I don't.
Sarah's like, I would.
Literally, we stopped on, we go
Yeah.
and knock on the door. And one of them was, truly, she was so just tied up with time, and she's like, I wanna call you guys, but I forget all about it, and then the next thing I know, I'm calling 911, and then I'm like, no, I'm reminded, well, now we're in the hospital for 2 weeks, and I forget about it, and it was more of just kind of a.
That happens.
They don't think
Like,
about
just
it,
kinda
yeah.
just put
We all
back
have
here,
SORs.
and so showing up at the door, I mean, I know I've done it twice, I don't know, and it works.
Our parents don't think about it either, because they're so busy with the day-to-day that they forget about that STARS plan emergency stuff until they actually need it. I'm guilty. My kid's neurologist just left, and they've called me probably 20 times and said I need to make an appointment with a new one, and I haven't. So I say every day, I'm gonna do that today, and
Do you want me to
so, yeah. So,
Another real benefit of contacting us about those kids, a couple things. First of all, sometimes we can tell you, hey, they've been here a bunch and it's okay and nothing new, and you know what I mean, continue, but you don't have to be nervous about it, because that's the big thing, is if something's out of date. You know. But the other thing is it can also, there's also kids that we're trying to find that are really at risk, and social work is involved, and it may be the time it's like, yeah, this is really time to send someone out to the house, and you know, you know, we don't always know what's going on your side, and you don't know what's going on our side. So when you get those difficult situations, it may be no big deal, and they're just busy, and everything's fine. But it can also be another piece of a puzzle where this is really, you know, just another check mark on, we need to, you know, get someone out there. We need to get children's division involved. They haven't shown up for appointments, and you know what I mean, what the hell's going on. So I think keeping everyone in the loop about that has got several benefits.
that's a really good point, because we had one for St. Louis City who was removed from the home, but I didn't even, we lost him. And it happens, and it surprises people, but you lose them in the system. And afterwards, talking to Dr. Gilmore about it, he's like, why didn't you call a duty officer to go by the house just to stop by? I'm like, it would have been a great idea. And he's okay, but he was in a bad situation. So just to know that he was.
They slip through the cracks on both sides. They slip through
Yeah.
the cracks all the time. You know, these clinics are busy. It's just another no-show. And then you look back in the chart, and then there's, you know, these kids come in, they're a disaster, and turns out there's red flags all over the chart, and no one was putting it all together, and this and this and that. And, you know, so anyways, the more eyes that are on the situation, the better off it will be.
And I have found too that email tends to be kind of the more consistent form of communication, mainly because, and a lot of our kids, not a lot of them, but some of them are on the lower income, so phone numbers change when parents lose service and have to get a new phone, or they move because they live in a trailer park and that one's, you know, so even showing up to their house might not work because maybe they don't even live there anymore. But usually people's emails tend to stay the same. So I have found, you know, more success doing email communication with some of these parents.
This is an excellent segue into the topic for next time in August. where I'd like to talk to some of the coordinators and have you guys kind of share ideas and tips and tricks that have worked for you, things that you do. I know, for instance, contacting, I know Chris had the Google survey. I was curious how that was going. I guess I just found out. You know, obviously, if you have something that's working for you, Nikki, and then also SCAD, I was super impressed at, I went to your guys' physician review board, and they had all the stats that you guys do, and that was awesome. So as far as talking about different ways that districts or departments want to track their stats on this stuff, and we can all talk about that too. So, did anybody else have anything else they wanted to bring up?
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, posters. Please take a poster if your service does not have one. We got plenty.
We're in the process of changing medical direction. How does that affect our implementing of our plans in the database?
So just whenever, at the midnight hour, whenever they switch, we'll switch over to we'll just make your new physician your medical
And
review.
they'll get all of the updates and everything?
Yeah,
Okay.
so as of right now, all the medical directors are receiving emails anytime a new
Okay.
plan comes to them, and so it'll just start coming to
Okay.
the new guy. So
Thank you.
we can have a.
You might wanna just, if you do have any of the ones where you're doing something special, the new medical, you know what I mean, the atypical ones or something, certainly if anything varies from current procedure, you know, current protocols, you wanna check the new protocols and see if you're varying from them. And any of the ones that are really high risk, I would just make sure the new medical director is enrolled on all those. I don't think they have necessarily review every single one, you can talk with them and see what they wanna do,
Okay.
but just certainly give them the option to take a look.
That's what I was about to say. So,
And-
and I think, depending on who you're switching to, they're also already in the system. So
Right, there's probably already, I don't think anyone's gonna have any idea what's going on.
It just depends on what they decide to coordinate tomorrow, so.
Please take a trike poster, like we just said. We want them widely dispersed, so even if you've got a hospital close to you that you think might want it, take it. We're not gonna watch how many you take. I want you to take them, because it's just so very important to us.
I'm actually tired of driving them around. So
Yeah,
please
no,
take them.
I want them everywhere. Even if I will send you the PDF to it if you want it printed somewhere. Whatever you want to do. So, we've recognized that as much as we've done with training, there's still so much more to do. I don't think we're even halfway there. So, we've got to get these into hospitals, into ambulance districts, flight services, wherever they can go. So people need to stop being scared of it and just remembering to address it. And Candy's mom wants them out everywhere too. So she actually was decannulated, everybody. We're so happy. She's doing awesome.
Awesome.
We're gonna keep her in stars for another month and make sure she does okay, but she was actually scared when she got decannulated. They had to hold the trach in front of her. She wanted it back. So, but she's doing great. So, anything else?
I think that's good. Thank you guys for your time this morning.
Yeah. We'll hang around if you guys have questions. I think Julie can probably